Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I was chatting with my buddy Alex about this subreddit, and he said, "Hey, I've got a perfect story for that." It wasn't his story, but his sister's, and I sat down with him to get all the details. Buckle up, it's a good one. And a long one. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah has been tinkering with computers since she was a kid, and she knows them like the back of her hand. Like most IT folks, she's bounced around from job to job. Her most recent employer was a logistics and distribution company in British Columbia, Canada. There were only 2 IT employees when she started. About 2 years ago, Sarah's employer decided it was time to modernize their software setup. They had separate programs for everything: dispatching, inventory, payroll, finances, and it was a nightmare trying to move information between them. They decided to implement an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System, and Sarah recommended one she was familiar with from a previous job. For those who aren't in the know, an ERP system is like the Swiss Army knife of business software. It handles everything from purchase orders and sales to inventory and personnel management. You can pull up reports to see which customer bought the most of product X in the last quarter, which salesperson improved their numbers the most, or which vendor has the quickest delivery times. Everyone in the company used the ERP system, but it was pretty complex. Most employees only used the parts relevant to their job. For instance, the warehouse staff would receive shipments, verify quantities, and confirm receipts. This would automatically update the inventory stats for the sales team. The warehouse folks didn't need to worry about prices or vendor details. They just focused on their part of the process. Sarah was running herself ragged during the implementation, but she managed to train most of the employees on their specific modules. After a few months, things were running relatively smoothly. She still got tickets for minor tweaks and the occasional hardware issue, but it was manageable. Then the company decided to expand its reach and started marketing in different time zones. That's when things got messy. The East Coast was 3 hours ahead, so if someone sent an email or an order at 8 a.m. their time, it would hit the system at 5 a.m. in BC. The prairies were an hour ahead and Ontario 2 hours ahead. This stretched out the workday, with many staff coming in early and staying late to handle the increased communication window. Sarah would arrive at 8 a.m. to find a bunch of people demanding immediate assistance, annoyed that she hadn't responded to requests submitted hours before her start time. The same thing happened at the end of the day, with her phone ringing during dinner as people wanted help right away. The company decided to stagger Sarah's and her IT colleagues' shifts. Sarah would start at 6 a.m. and work until 2:30 p.m., while her colleague would work from 10:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Her colleague Mark had young kids and refused the shift change. "I can't do those hours," Mark told their boss. "I need to be there for my family in the evenings." The boss, Mr. Johnson, was unsympathetic. "We need coverage for our expanded business hours. If you can't accommodate that, we'll have to find someone who can—" Mark stood his ground. "Then I guess you'll need to find someone else," he said, handing in his resignation. That left Sarah as the sole IT person in the department. Mr. Johnson assured her they'd hire a replacement soon, but they were having trouble finding someone who knew the ERP system, mainly because they were offering a salary well below market value. Sarah decided to broach the subject of compensation with Mr. Johnson. "With the increased workload and hours, I think it's fair to discuss a raise," she said during their next meeting. Mr. Johnson shook his head. "We're not in a position to offer raises right now, Sarah. You understand the current economic climate." Undeterred, Sarah pressed on. "Okay. But what about overtime pay for the extra hours I'm putting in?" "As an IT specialist, you're exempt from overtime laws in BC," Mr. Johnson replied smugly. Sarah looked it up later, and unfortunately he was correct. This situation dragged on for months. Sarah's social circle included many IT professionals, and she knew the company's job postings were way off the mark. They weren't going to find another tech at those rates. Things continued to deteriorate. Sarah would get berated if she missed a call or email, regardless of when it came in. She had to train new hires on the ERP system while also managing all the hardware issues. She repeatedly asked for better compensation, but was always denied. It became clear that it was time to look for a new job. Now here's where the revenge kicks in. Sarah had full access to the ERP system. When a user logged in, the time was recorded, and even if they didn't log out manually, the system would automatically log them out after 15 minutes of inactivity. Everyone in the company was salaried, and many were putting in long hours. Sarah knew that BC labor law mandated overtime pay for salaried workers after 40 hours a week, except for managers and supervisors. So Sarah dug into the system and ran a report for each non-managerial employee, going all the way back to when the ERP system was first implemented. She then reached out to an employment lawyer to make sure she was on solid ground. Sarah secured another job and, on her last day, sent an email to every employee in the company. The subject line read, "You're legally entitled to overtime pay." Attached was an Excel sheet showing the hours each person had worked beyond 40 hours per week. The body of the email included the name and contact information of the employment lawyer. All hell broke loose. Nearly every employee authorized the lawyer to negotiate with the company on their behalf. The company ended up having to pay out a massive sum in back overtime. You know what the kicker is? Sarah told me later. All they had to do was pay me fairly for the extra work I was doing. Instead, they ended up paying almost everyone a small fortune in overtime. The moral of the story? Sometimes being cheap can end up costing you a whole lot more in the long run. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this, but here goes. It all started on a scorching hot day last summer. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas where the heat can be brutal. I'm talking the kind of heat that makes you want to strip down to your underwear and stick your head in the freezer. I had just finished mowing my lawn and was drenched in sweat. My t-shirt was soaked through, so I decided to change into something cooler before heading out to grab some groceries. I threw on a tank top, thinking nothing of it. It was a regular men's tank top, nothing scandalous or revealing, just your average piece of clothing meant to keep you cool in 100-degree weather. As I was walking to my car, I noticed my neighbor Karen standing in her driveway, glaring at me. Karen had moved in about 6 months ago with her husband and teenage son. From day one, she'd been a pain in the neck, always complaining about something or trying to enforce her own made-up rules on the neighborhood. I gave her a polite nod and was about to get in my car when she marched over, her face twisted in disgust. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "What do you think you're wearing?" I looked down at my tank top, confused. A shirt?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "That is not appropriate attire for our neighborhood. There are children around, you know. You need to go change immediately." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ma'am, it's 100 degrees out. I'm just trying to stay cool. There's nothing inappropriate about this shirt." "It's indecent!" she shrieked. "I can see your shoulders and armpits. What if my son sees you? You're setting a terrible example." At this point, I was getting annoyed. "Look, Karen, I'm not changing. This is my property, and I'll wear what I want. If you don't like it, don't look." I got in my car and drove off, leaving Karen sputtering in my driveway. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy was I wrong. When I got back from the store about an hour later, I found Karen and her son Tyler waiting for me. Tyler was a big kid, about 17 years old and on the high school football team. He had at least 50 pounds on me and looked like he was itching for a fight. As soon as I stepped out of my car, Karen pointed at me and screeched, "There he is! That's the pervert who's corrupting the neighborhood. Tyler, teach him a lesson." Before I could even process what was happening, Tyler charged at me like a raging bull. I managed to sidestep him at the last second and he went crashing into my car. "Whoa, kid!" I yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" Tyler spun around, his face red with anger. "My mom says you're a sicko who needs to be taught some respect." He lunged at me again, swinging his fists wildly. I backed up, trying to avoid his punches. "Tyler, stop! I don't want to fight you!" But the kid wasn't listening. He kept coming at me, egged on by his mother's shouts of encouragement. "That's it, honey. Show him what happens to degenerates in our neighborhood." I kept dodging and weaving, but Tyler managed to clip me on the jaw. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end unless I defended myself. The next time he charged, I grabbed his arm and used his momentum to flip him over my shoulder. It was a move I'd learned in a self-defense class years ago, and I'd never thought I'd actually use it. Tyler hit the ground hard, landing awkwardly on his arm. There was a sickening crack, and he let out a howl of pain. I immediately backed off, horrified at what had happened. Karen rushed to her son's side, cradling his arm. "My baby! Look what you've done to my baby!" She turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're going to pay for this! I'm calling the police!" True to her word, Karen whipped out her phone and dialed cop. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run inside and hide, but I knew that would only make me look guilty. So I stayed put, waiting for the police to arrive. It didn't take long for 2 patrol cars to pull up. The officers got out, looking wary as they surveyed the scene. One of them approached me while the other went to check on Tyler. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" the officer asked. I took a deep breath and explained everything, from Karen's initial complaint about my tank top to Tyler's unprovoked attack. I made sure to emphasize that I had only acted in self-defense. The officer listened carefully, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you tell your son to attack this man?" Karen's face went pale. She started sputtering, trying to come up with an explanation. I didn't mean he was dressed inappropriately. Someone had to do something. The officer shook his head in disbelief. Ma'am, telling your son to assault someone over their clothing is not only illegal, it's completely unacceptable. While this was happening, the other officer had been talking to Tyler, who was still clutching his arm in pain. The kid finally admitted that his mother had indeed told him to teach me a lesson. The first officer turned back to me. Sir, do you want to press charges? I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see Karen face consequences for her actions, but I also didn't want to ruin the kid's life over his mother's stupidity. I don't want to press charges against Tyler, I said. He's just a kid who was following his mother's orders, but I do want to file a complaint against Karen for inciting violence. The officer nodded. Understood. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Karen, realizing the trouble she was in, suddenly changed her tune. Wait, can't we work this out? I'm sure we can come to some kind of agreement. But it was too late for that. The officers informed Karen that she was being charged with inciting violence and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. They also called for an ambulance to take Tyler to the hospital for his broken arm. As Karen was being led to the police car, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. Please don't do this. I'll lose my job if I have a criminal record. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You should have thought about that before you sent your son to attack me, I replied calmly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police statements, meetings with lawyers, and court appearances. Karen tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming I had provoked her son and that my clothing was a public nuisance. But the evidence was overwhelmingly against her. In the end, Karen was found guilty of inciting violence and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. She was sentenced to community service and mandatory anger management classes. She also lost her job when her employer found out about the incident. As for Tyler, he avoided any criminal charges thanks to my decision not to press charges against him. He did, however, have to attend counseling sessions and do community service of his own. Last I heard, he was doing better and had even apologized to me for his actions. Karen and her family moved away shortly after the trial, unable to face the neighborhood after everything that had happened. The new neighbors who moved in are lovely people who don't seem to care what anyone wears. Looking back on it all, I still can't believe how a simple tank top led to such chaos. But I learned an important lesson. Stand your ground when you know you're right, but always try to de-escalate a situation before it gets out of hand. And maybe invest in some security cameras, just in case. Oh, and I still wear tank tops on hot days. Some things never change. The next one is a petty revenge story. I hate it when someone parks in a handicapped space. I have family who need those spaces, and I'm retired law enforcement, so I miss being able to address the problem when I see it. The other day, a guy enters the small parking lot of the local beer distributor just before me. I park legally, and he takes the handicapped spot right outside the door. I check out his vehicle, no placards or disabled license plate, thinking, should I say something to him, but why bother? Nothing good will come of it. I walk in the store 5 seconds behind him. He picks up a case of beer and gets in line to pay. As I walked past him to get my preferred beer, I said to him, "A cop just pulled in the parking lot." He says, "Oh crap," drops his beer, runs out to the parking lot, gets in his truck, and backs out of the handicapped spot. I take his place in line, go out to my truck. He's circling the parking lot, looking for the cop. He sees me and says, "Where did he go?" I answer, "I don't know," and go home. If he had just followed the rules, he would have been done faster. I wonder if he realized he had been ducked with. I hope so. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In 2003, I returned home from my first year of college. I had decided to switch schools and degrees and attend a local music technical college instead. I moved back into my parents' home and drove into the city each day for classes. In order to save on parking, I purchased a permit to park in a church's lot. This lot was about 10 blocks from the school, so I had a decent walk each day. About a week into classes, I was on my walk, smoking a cigarette, when out of nowhere a homeless man appears right next to me. He looks as you might imagine, late 50s, messy salt and pepper hair, flannel jacket, snow pants, work boots with no laces. He leaned in and asked, "Hey buddy, can I get a smoke?" Now I was 19 at the time, and a bit cocky. I was going to give him one, but he had to work for it. I told him he could have one, but he would have to walk with me to class and keep me company while he smoked it. He agreed, and off we went. We exchanged names and asked each other basic questions about our lives, the normal pleasantries. About a block from school, we tossed our butts and he leans in again and says, "Hey buddy, I gotta ask, got any spare change?" I replied, "Sorry, but I don't keep change on me." At the time, I tossed all my spare change in some glass milk jugs I had in my room, so we parted ways that day. I kid you not, 2 weeks later, this man had memorized my class schedule every single day. This man would meet me at the corner, ask for a smoke, and walk me to class, every day asking me for change, and me having none. This continued for almost 15 months. The school I went to didn't have summer breaks. So now it's just a few weeks away from graduation. It's the end of winter. I'm getting ready in the morning for class. I put on my leather trench coat, grab my book bag, and head for the door. I look down at the floor and see 2 glass milk jugs overflowing with change. I look down at the huge pockets in my coat, then back at the change jars. I'm gonna do it. I take each milk jar and turn them upside down into each pocket. You have no idea how much 2 gallons of change actually weighs. Then I head off for school. Things start off like normal. He meets me at the corner. I give him a smoke. We set off. I'm trying my best to step lightly as to not make my pockets jingle, and I can't look him in the face because I don't want to totally lose it. We finally get to the end of our walk. We tossed our cigarettes. He turned to me and said, "Hey buddy, I gotta ask, you got any change?" So I turn to him and say, "Okay, I'm gonna make you a deal. I will give you all the change I have in my pockets if you promise to never ask me for change again. Deal?" He nods his head in agreement and holds out his one hand, palm up. "No, you don't understand," I said. "I have a lot of change." So he holds out both hands, cupping them together. "No," I said, "you don't understand. I have a lot of change." He stands there with a questioning look on his face, so I grab the bottom of his sweatshirt and pull it up, and make him hold it like a hammock. I then proceed to start shoveling handfuls of change into its sweatshirt, handful after handful, and his eyes are getting wider in sheer disbelief. Just when he thinks I'm about finished, I switch to the other pocket. More and more change. Its sound is echoing between the buildings, and both of us are laughing uncontrollably. I finally finished. He thanked me and waddled off like a pregnant woman, and I went to class. The next day was bright and sunny. I park my car at the church. I'm walking, big smile on my face. He meets me at the corner, also with a big smile on his face. He leans in with a huge grin and says, "Hey buddy, can I get a smoke?" Long pause. "Yeah buddy, you can have a smoke." The next one is an entitled people story. This story I'm about to tell happened several years ago, and I only just remembered it after seeing said Karen at the grocery store. Small heads up, but I've got a terrible memory, so the specifics are going to be a little fuzzy. For some background, this takes place in a small-town church in the Midwest. I know y'all already have some red flags raised, but it wasn't all that bad. In fact, it was quite nice. Most of the people who attended there were really nice old people. And there was only a handful of people there that were below their 30s. I was easily the youngest person there, and I think I was 13 or 14 at the time. Anyways, I suppose I should introduce the main character of the story. The pastor's daughter, let's call her Samantha. I think this was around the time she graduated high school. She was awesome. She actually acted as the church's Sunday school person. Even though I was the only one attended, LOL, she always snuck me a second granola bar during snack time. A big thing to know about Samantha. She was a lesbian. I'm not kidding. She even had a girlfriend at the time whom she brought to church with her. Now, before anyone gets worried for her, she seemed fine. Nobody was up at arms about her sexuality. Aside from the occasional disapproving look from one of the regulars, nobody really said anything. I do remember one conversation Samantha had with the church bus driver, who said he was disappointed about her choice in partners, but that was it. Nobody spoke a mean thing about her. That is, until this Karen showed up. She was new in town. She had come to our church around winterish. You know that stereotype about the super evangelical black woman? She was exactly that. Super loud, a bit obese, and wearing a fancy Sunday dress and hat. She was easily the most fancily dressed person there. She also had 2 kids, a baby boy and a girl in her teens. I wasn't really paying much attention to her, though I could definitely hear her hemming and hawing about something. Anyways, the story begins during service. Samantha had brought her girlfriend at the time, and Karen and her family was a couple pews behind them. Just before the incident took place, I was passing around the donations dish. I distinctly remember she was glaring daggers at the back of Samantha and her girlfriend's heads as she dropped some cash into the dish. The pastor, who I'll call John, was giving his sermon when the incident happened. I heard Karen screech, which scared the crap out of me. I think Samantha and her girlfriend might have snuggled too close together, IDK. Anyway, the whole church fell silent in shock as Karen proceeded to go on the biggest homophobic rant I've ever heard. I actually learned a slur or two because of it. She was demanding Samantha and her girlfriend be thrown out of the church. The whole place was silent for a moment before Pastor John cleared his throat and spoke. I can't remember everything he said, but there is one part in his speech I remember so distinctly that has made me respect the hell out of him to this day. My daughter's sexual orientation does not change the love I have for her, nor does it diminish the worth that God has endowed her with. She is made in the image of God, as we all are, and her worth is inherent and unassailable. To suggest otherwise is to misunderstand the very essence of our faith, which is rooted in love, grace, and acceptance. Aspects, it seems, you don't hold up yourself. It was like he was handing down the word of God. By the end of it, everybody was giving her a disapproving glare. Karen's daughter looked like she wanted to sink into the floor, the baby was crying, and Karen was legit purple. She screamed something about this place being a false temple, and we would all burn for defending this insert slur, before storming out. I could legit hear her peel her car out of the parking lot. After that, I think the rest of the churchgoers softened towards her. I distinctly remember this one old couple asking Samantha and her girlfriend about LGBTQ stuff a couple weeks after this incident. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.